This is MasterMinds, where we talk with leaders from many industries on how mental health and stress has impacted their lives. Many people believe that good health is centered on the body and suffer silently from poor mental health, anything from anxiety to depression to chronic work stress. Only a select few know that the core of good leadership and healthy living lies in the mastery of our minds. In this podcast, host Bjorn Lee and his guests share their stories of fighting stress and achieving mental resilience. The goal? To encourage others to do the same. Here's Bjorn.
Welcome back to another episode of the MasterMinds podcast. Today's guest is Tony Estrella. He's a board director, entrepreneur, former insurance innovation executive, investor, and interestingly, science fiction author. So Tony applies his global digital health expertise and storytelling skills as an author to catapult healthcare into the future. He is also an APAC expert panelist and author of a new white paper on the future of health in Asia Pacific. It's aptly named Vision for APAC in 2020, and this is part of the Future-Proofing Healthcare Initiative that is supported by Roche. So without further ado, Tony Estrella. Welcome, Tony. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bjorn. Thanks for having me on as a guest.
You're probably the most creative business leader that I know, as I was racking my brain doing research before our interview today. Not to mention, you're literally the most creative person I know because you actually wrote a science fiction novel, right? You wrote Comatose. So for the readers who are just listening in, I first connected with Tony some time back about our mutual passion for science fiction. I got a copy of his book, Comatose, which I would describe as a Netflix-esque take on lucid dreaming. I think it really sums up your passion for brain health and also about sleep science as well. What inspired this book? How much was due to your career, and what got you to write about it?
Well, first, thanks for the compliment about calling me a creative person. I do take that as a very, very high compliment because if you rewound the clock back to when I was graduating from university, I studied electrical engineering academically, and if you went around a room and asked people in a room, are you creative? I would not have raised my hand at all. And as I've learned, it is a journey to tap into your creative mind. And so everyone has the capability of becoming more creative and applying the skills to do it. And I highly encourage people to read a book called Wired to Create as a roadmap on that journey. And so, to your question about writing Comatose, the content for my book actually came from my lucid dreams. And so for people who don't know what lucid dreaming is, it's where not only you recognize that you're dreaming, but you are actively controlling yourself within those dreams. So it's like dreaming with two hands on the steering wheel, as opposed to being a passenger in the back seat or in the front seat in the non-driver side. And it sounds fantastical, but a majority of people have had some experience with it, mostly when we were children. And so I actually dreamt the content of the book. So I dreamt the end, then plot, characters, key scenes. I pushed myself to write this book. It took me 12 months to draft the manuscript. Eventually jumped through a series of hurdles and got connected to a publisher in the UK. And I'm writing the second book right now.
Amazing. I can't wait. Wow, you managed to spend only 12 months to actually write out the manuscript. I guess your lucid dreamings were really effective. I've
dreamt in the sequel, and it's a part of a trilogy. I have since dreamt the end of both of those stories, characters, plots. It's really amazing that when I look at my notes, how much detail I have pulling it out of my dreams. It's been very fun.
So do you have a dream journal beside your bed that you wake up and you start writing them down? Because I never remember my dreams.
Yeah, I do. And you know what I've really found to be an exciting discovery over time has been this concept of journaling is something that is valid, not just for lucid dreaming inspired creativity, but it's important for overall creativity, just being able to write observations. And then back to the point of this podcast, as you're trying to deal with the emotional ups and downs of what's going on in the world around you, in your workplace, concept of journaling is a way to help just regulate yourself when you're trying to
Totally.
think about the various influences and sometimes negative impact that things may have on you. And you just go and write it down, and it helps you just remember and think about it.
Do you have a community of lucid dreamers now?
When I started, I didn't. I had rarely met lucid dreamers, but especially in researching the second book, and as I've launched the first book, I continue to meet people who have lucid dreaming experiences and are either very active, and they go to retreats to do this. They learn various styles of meditation to help them tap into their dreams more. It's a fascinating area that leads into the science of the mind, and that. To your point about how I think about my fiction writing, you mentioned lucid dreaming and sleep science, and sleep is one of the 3 lifestyle risk factors that we should pay attention to, and overall, it's one of the ones we pay least attention to.
Yeah.
We have a fairly developed understanding of exercise and nutrition, still nascent in the view of many people around what we could learn about sleep, and when I think about the writing I do, I really enjoy writing about the science of the mind. And so first book explored lucid dreaming, meditation was part of it. As you know, that played a big role for one of the characters in figuring out how to deal with being diagnosed with cancer. And the second book, where it moves beyond dreaming into exploring areas of how our brain works and who we are, things like what is consciousness, and it's a fascinating area for doing research, and how that then impacts how we view ourselves and what we do to try to keep our brains and minds healthy with the ups and downs of every day.
It's amazing. I love the way that you blend both the entertainment aspect of fiction and education as well, by importing sleep science into your book. I think that's what really needed to unpack some of this academic and scientific knowledge and bring it to bear on the business world. And I think that's quite a nice segue as well to really dive deeper into the personality that is you, Tony. Could you share with our listeners what was some of the most stressful period of your life? Because we all deal with stress all the time, right? And so you'll be very informative and educational as well for all of us to hear from you what your most stressful episode of your life was, and exactly how did you get out of it? How did you overcome it?
It's when you mentioned that this podcast is focused on people dealing with stress, anxiety, and various factors of how to keep your brain, fully functioning in a way that helps you keep overall health. It made me think that there's really, for me anyway, a really high correlation from the most stressful period of my life to the happiest period of my life, which goes back to when my daughter was born. So I have a 5.5-year-old daughter, and we moved to Singapore when my wife was 7 months pregnant, and we were temporarily going to relocate from London to Asia and then move back. And one thing led to another. We ended up I ended up with an interesting opportunity to help head up health innovation for MetLife for Asia Pacific. And I was moving with a very pregnant wife, starting a new role in a part of the world I hadn't worked in before. And and then once my daughter was born, then there's the responsibilities of being a new dad. And so all of those are layers of potential sources of stress, anxiety, trying to manage your time when you're somewhat sleep deprived. So it's a recipe for either falling apart or tapping into the built-in resilience that you've created in yourself over time. And what I found for me was it was the latter. I was thankfully, over the years, I've had a range of experiences that have forced me to build up my internal reserves and build up my strength to be able to understand how I interact when I'm the recipient of stress and triggers that could trigger stress. And I think if I break down the tools that I use to be able to navigate challenging environments, and hopefully this helps at least one person listening to this, because that's always a goal. Is like anytime you try to share advice, if you help one person, you've done something positive.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the first thing that really helped me over time was to figure out what triggers actually cause me to react differently. And that can come from like when you're in uni and getting a ton of academic work being thrown your way. It could be dealing with relationship challenges with friends or people you're dating at the time. It could be family challenges. All of those are triggers, and they cause you to then have to operate differently because you are no longer in control, right? That's both something to be aware of, and also it's a judgment point to decide how much actually are you in control to begin with. But whatever you are in control, if you're thrown off, how do you react to get yourself back to what you consider your center? So the advice I would say is, number one is spend a lot of time figuring out what your center is, because that's your comfort zone. And then either by reflecting on what has triggered you in the past, or if you haven't done that before, pay a lot of attention to what happens when you receive new triggers. What happens when you get thrown off of center, and how do you get yourself back without making yourself feel unhappy, stressed, anxious about what's going on around you? And the actions you take to recenter are the really important points of what you should try to replicate. Because if you, say, for example, rely on a particular group of friends to help you rebalance and recenter, keep doing that. That's great. If you end up having to read a lot of books or watch television or do more exercise or any combination of all of those are the things that you want to repeat and try. And there's no single recipe that works, but if you break it down into recognize triggers, know your center, and then figure out how to rebalance, at least you can start developing a process. And so that's what I did during this period of time. Was I'd identified those muscles and flexed those muscles, hypothetical muscles, so that when I was going through this, what could have been an extremely stressful period, I managed to recenter myself consistently. And despite how much I could get thrown off, I was able to bring myself back. And it was not perfect. I had my periods where, I couldn't recenter fast enough, and then things piled up, and eventually I was able to get back. But, some things weren't pretty during that process. But by and large, came out happy person, extremely close to my wife and to my daughter. And now that we're forced to be thrown off center again through these last months of being, in the pandemic, we've practiced the muscles as a family the same way we practice them individually. And so I think we're doing okay.
Amazing. I love the analogy of how you said you were digging a well, building up those inner reserve of mental strength that you could, draw upon during periods of difficulty, such as, the pandemic right now, or even back then when you're going through that stressful period. So if I would unpack that even more, could you share with us, what are some of the daily routines that you do to actually maintain or even improve your mental health and well-being? Do you have a journal? You write out those triggers that you mentioned, or are there any other kind of practices that you do?
Yeah, exercise for me is an enormous both release, but also time of reflection. So while I haven't done a triathlon in a long time, swimming, biking, running, especially running, are very good for me, because it just gets me into a period where I can be alone with my thoughts, or it can be music influenced thoughts as well. But the key thing is that I'm alone, and I'm able to let things work themselves out in my head as I'm also pushing my body to just release whatever tension had been building up. And pretty consistently since after uni, when I started running, because I wasn't always a runner, it's just something that I really enjoy. And so whatever form of exercise anyone does, it's been pretty well studied that is a good way to start a journey to figure out how to recenter and rebalance. The next thing that I do is in journaling, the act of capturing information and letting your mind and body process it is really helpful, because then it may find a way to be expressed in a different way that was unexpected for you. And then the third thing is, in terms of my lucid dreaming, I have found that the same things that happen for me when I'm running, in terms of processing what's going on in life, are the same things that happen when I'm dreaming and lucid dreaming. And it's in this period when I'm like half asleep, half awake, lucid dreaming, in a state of a long run. There's something that really helps, and it is meditative, because it's allowing me to separate myself and what I consider my individual from the circumstances around me, and let it reorient itself in a way that my brain can then either break down the problem into something manageable, because it might be because something's so overwhelming I just don't know where to start, or if I have already broken it down but I don't know what to do. Over time, I then, using this period, eventually figure out what actions I can take, which help make me feel better about myself in solving whatever that challenge may be.
That is fascinating. Has any of your friends, tried some of these lucid dreaming or even journaling techniques as part of their work? Because I can imagine that, a lot of your friends are in similar positions as well. Perhaps they write your book as well. And have you tried to maybe give them some advice on how they could try some of your techniques and apply it on their own lives as well?
So yes, because for any business leader, you're constantly in a battle, especially, let's just use a CEO as an example, but this applies to any position in a company. You're always in a battle of trying to stay ahead of the problems that you may face in the workplace. And that battle is also challenged by the fact that you may not be sleeping enough. And so this, coming a bit full circle, as to one thing that anyone can do is, while we may be tempted to try to work through things with less sleep and sacrifice sleep for the sake of trying to address any sort of challenge in life, you're better off trying to maximize your sleep and eventually what will happen over time, even if you can't lucid dream, what you'll find is that your awareness and your mental health and the way that your brain can be sharp when you're awake is impacted by consistent sleep. Physical restoration is a big component of why we sleep. The other part of why we sleep is we convert short-term memories to long-term memories, and that collision is part of the reason that we get dreams where you might dream about childhood friends in current settings. But it's also, for healthy minds, a way to regulate emotions. And so all three of those combined, if you're deprived of sleep, none of those are happening. And so you're at a disadvantage. So the two pieces of advice I give to people, friends or just any colleagues that I have and across the various hats I wear across many businesses, I always encourage people to read a book first called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. It's very consumer friendly, breaks down the science into examples that are relatable. And if you do that, you'll read that there isn't a single sleep study that shows that less than 6.5 hours of sleep is good for anybody. And for someone, for a long period of time, I only slept 4 to 5 hours a night, just so excited about life and building companies. And
Right.
I just didn't feel like I needed the sleep. And in hindsight, I should have just gotten the extra sleep. People like Jeff Bezos now are very focused on making sure they get the right level of nightly rest. And I encourage people to do that. And then the second thing that I encourage is to journal. Build it as a habit. Wake up every day and just write down anything you can remember, because those ideas over time start to become more and more accessible to your brain because you now have created a practice out of it. And that can help you in the business context. And an example of that is that in the 3 examples I talk about of what people have done in lucid dreaming, on the more creative side, Paul McCartney wrote Yesterday based off his dreams.
Mm-hmm.
On the more analytical side, Dmitry Mendeleev figured out the periodic table. So complete analytical problem, just solved it through nonlinear problem solving, which is a very common thing that happens in sleep. So that's one reason to journal, is that you can tap into a new skill that you may not know you had.
Absolutely.
And then writing fiction is in between. You have to be both creative and analytical. So Mary Shelley and Frankenstein is a third example there.
Amazing. You're in good company there.
Yeah, I hope more people can join it.
Definitely, definitely. And so, I have one final question, right? And I've read your white paper on future-proofing healthcare. You depicted what is a futuristic vision of what healthcare will look like in the society in 2050, right? In 2050. So I think that is a take at a societal level, what healthcare could look like. What does a more enlightened version of health and well-being would look like at a society level? Now it looks like you've got your hands, at least maybe even one hand, on the crystal ball for 2050. But if I were to actually push you further, what does that crystal ball tell you about the future of work? What does a more enlightened, healthy workforce look like in the year 2050, where mental health or stress management is concerned?
So one of the things I wrote about is a trigger for what caused healthcare to reinvent itself as an industry in 2050 was a miracle cure for aging. So longevity becomes a reality. And I thought of that approach because when I think about, say, climate change as an example, right, this vision of a dystopian future where the planet's crumbling around us is a motivator for not just the oil and gas industry, but clean energy industry, even food are now industries that are motivated by that vision. And if we can envision a future where we now live till we're 150 years old, what do we do with that extra time? What do we do with ourselves? And so I think the first answer to your question from a workplace perspective is we now can have multiple careers, and that allows us to then think about our individual and personal growth as having at least more than one stage. Right? It's no longer I will do one thing and that's what I will do, and then it'll be my time to stop working. We have more time now. And if you make an assumption that, and it's an optimistic view for sure, right? This white paper, I wanted to take a view of, we are past the pandemic and we're now thinking about things, and people are working together. There's a social conscience, and so we make that as a base assumption that people will make a leap together to enable greater society, let people have more than one career and empower it. So where will people work is a next question. So we will have people working in space. We will have people working, on land in whatever types of work environments we currently have today, and maybe slightly different variations of it. We will have people working in maybe underwater as a normal workplace. Right? So now you're thinking about dealing with different environments where people are also separated physically from their loved ones for more extended periods of time. So that's a second factor then becomes location. And if the future of travel improves, then maybe you can get between each of those three environments or anywhere on the planet in a faster way, but you'll still have separation. And then the type of work that you do, if you kind of break down how we work today, there's physical labor, there's purely intellectual labor, there's things in between, the number of people you may work with, whether you're remote, whether you're physically working together. All of those things will evolve over time. And so when I think about it from a mental health perspective, the concept of isolation and the concept of figuring out how to be close to the people that matter most to you will have to be completely reinvented as well. Because it may not seem as far into us now, but 6 months ago, this whole concept of us doing everything virtually was not something we would have accepted. And so now taste of what that might look like is at least there. But that's an important one that we'll have to figure out, because we do, as human beings, need the right level of emotional connections and support with the people around us to maintain our mental health. And so that, I think, will be an interesting challenge to overcome. And then I think in this concept of having more than one career, being able to navigate change between career one, career two, enabling someone to take your old job while you replace someone in a job that you may be going into while they move on to something else, it's going to be more complicated. And I think another aspect of human nature is we're fairly resistant to change, and change will become much more part of the norm. And how we adapt to that in the workplace will also determine a lot of our mental health challenges that we'll have to overcome.
I love it. I love the positive outlook that you have on the pandemic, that it has almost seemed to become a crucible or an incubator for society and us to learn how to deal with change, right? It's you also apply quite a fair bit of positivity to looking at how we could adopt multiple careers, right? In your futuristic vision. I think that really ties in a lot to lifelong learning and the popularity of online courses that we have as well. So I thought what you said here about a longer human lifespan and the fact that we could switch from career 1 or career 2, having that privilege and honor to actually make that change, go through the learning process over again. That's a very nice theme of mental resilience, of learning and education as well inside there. So I really like that, nice parallel that you have. So thank you for sharing so much about the what the future of work could look like in 2050, for all the insights that you have in bringing together the storytelling aspect of your own personal interests, and also how that ties in with what you've seen across your professional experience. And I think I learned a lot from there, and I hopefully our listeners will get inspired by some of the stories that you have brought to us as well. So thank you very much, Tony. Thank you for sharing all your stories and your wisdom for the show. And I hope to talk more to you again.
Thanks, Bjorn. Really appreciated being a guest on your podcast here. And if people have any questions, just direct them my way. My website's probably the easiest way for that to happen. TonyEstrella.com. And I look forward to hearing this podcast when you release it.
Thanks, Tony.
Yeah. Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you. Cheers.